So, again, Conundrum there did a great job of kind of listing off all the people that are just what Trump refers to as the panicans. However, there are other people within the conservative movement that are not panicans, but they do have serious concerns about things that are either being done or not being done to the degree that we expected or should be able to expect. So let's do this. I'm going to go through here, and I asked Grok here an important question. I said, I want to hear about objective wins and objective losses during the Trump administration. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over the losses, because again, I'm not trying to convince people that that everything's been hunky-dory, that everything's been great, that everything's wonderful. I'm not going to do that. So right off the bat, here are some problems that has taken place. So first of all, we have ballooning federal deficits and a major national debt. So this has always been a conservative critique of the left, of federal government spending. So national debt exceeded 38 to 39 trillion by early 2026, which is roughly up $2 trillion in the prior year. Now, a lot of this has to do with things that happened way before the Trump administration, but there is a reasonable expectation that when we elect Republicans, they're going to fix these things. And the bottom line is that the 2026 deficit prediction is about 1.9 trillion, rising toward 3.1 trillion annually by 2036. So that's a problem. There's no question that has to be effectively addressed. The debt to GDP ratio is projected to approach 120% by 2036. Now, keep something in mind. When they say projected by 2036, that means it doesn't have to be that way. It means that if current trends continue, that's where it's going to be. So there's no question that we should be looking at the size of federal spending, the amount of federal spending right now, and having some problems with that. Another critique that takes place is tariffs. Now, I have said for the longest time that if you believe that tariffs are a recipe for economic success, I don't think that the facts bear that out. That doesn't mean that I don't think tariffs have any role to play with respect to economic or trade policy. Clearly, if you have a country which is freely allowed to import goods into your country, but is not allowing for the importation of your goods into their country, well, then there's some correction that you might want to make there. And tariffs can be a strategy to achieve greater trade across the board. But ultimately, what we want is a big marketplace, right? We want it to be easy to be able to buy and sell products, because that ultimately makes a country wealthier, is when they can, as many people they can sell products to and as many people as they can buy products from. And so the trade deficit thing has not been impacted the way we wanted. So there are negative impacts of the Trump tariffs, but it's important to understand there's also been positive impacts of the Trump tariffs. Another thing that people have been worried about is kind of this expansion of executive power or big government tactics. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I will always consider that something of a concern, but really I haven't seen Donald Trump attempt to use big government anywhere near the way that the left uses it. And quite frankly, I expect the right to actually use legitimate power to achieve legitimate objectives. So I don't always consider that a bad thing, but it's something that has sparked some concern from a variety of people, and so I'm not going to disregard it. A lot of the other concerns that have taken place so far have been about the inability to be able to cut spending, the inability to be able to significantly cut the size of the federal bureaucracy. That's been a claim. A lot of people have claimed that, we were promised mass deportations and that hasn't happened yet. One of the biggest complaints is that we weren't supposed to get bogged down in international conflicts, especially those in the Middle East. And it seems like there's been a lot of international conflicts, and the current one going on in Iran has negatively impacted gas prices in such a way that's hurting Americans, and doesn't seem, at least right now, a lot of people are predicting that we're going to replace the Ayatollah with the Ayatollah. And once again, this is another manifestation of the U.S. getting involved in conflicts that we shouldn't be getting involved with, or they'll claim that Israel is primarily responsible for our involvement. And that's not where our focus needs to be. Our focus needs to be domestically. They will also point out that there haven't been the sort of mass prosecutions that we wanted to see going on, especially with respect to the 50 plus members of the intelligence community that signed on to a document saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian propaganda, or that the original justification for the impeachment and the Steele dossier, nobody who's been actually punished for that, right? These are some of the claims that have been made. A lot of things too with respect to getting rid of certain regulations. These are all legitimate concerns, like the failure to do things like pass the SAVE Act. Like, why is it that Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and we have a majority number of conservative justices on the Supreme Court, and yet we haven't passed the SAVE Act yet? We still have birthright citizenship in the country. Why, oh why, have these things not been properly addressed? Why did DOGE uncover all of this fraud, waste, abuse, not to mention the direct manipulation of tax dollars being used for ideological purposes? Why did we were not able to cut that? Why wasn't the Republican House able to cut that? Right? These are all legitimate concerns. Right? Nothing of what I just mentioned is something that should just be automatically disregarded. Nobody that comes up with a coherent argument for why these are concerns that need to be addressed should automatically be lumped in with panicans or automatically be lumped in with the people that are saying, oh, screw this, we got to vote Democrat now in order to teach Republicans a lesson. These can all be legitimate critiques. Having said that, can we also talk about some of the things that actually have been significant conservative wins? So first of all, anybody that's going to say, like, we've accomplished nothing that was promised has been done. Ladies and gentlemen, if you were looking at what immigration to this country looked like, both legal and illegal, over the last 4 years of the Biden administration, it was atrocious. Literally millions upon millions of people crossing the border illegally. And that dropped almost overnight as soon as Donald Trump took office. So southwest border encounters dropped dramatically. Monthly averages under 9,000 post-inauguration versus over 200,000 interactions during the Biden administration. We actually achieved negative net migration in 2025 for the first time in decades. And the estimates range anywhere from negative 10,000 to negative 250,000. When it comes to deportations, you have all these people saying, oh, we were promised mass deportations and it's not happening. Okay, deportations and removals surged significantly. Hundreds of thousands via ICE in fiscal year 2025 periods, plus over 1.9 to 2.2 million self-deportations. Now, when people say I wanted mass deportations, I don't know what people expected to happen, because it's not as simple as saying everyone get out. You actually have to dedicate time, allocate resources to go and do this, not to mention the fact that you have to do it in blue states and blue cities where the mayors, governors, police chiefs, attorney generals are all actively working against you. You have liberal judges that were not appointed by Donald Trump that are issuing nationwide injunctions against certain activities that would lead to greater deportations. Despite all of that, we're looking at right now probably close to anywhere from 2.5 to 3 million deportations in less than 2 years. I understand if you want more, but if you got some ideas on how to achieve that without completely upending the system, ruining due process, or creating a host of other issues, great, then go ahead and offer it up. And when you do so, please run for office. But this needs to be acknowledged that Trump has secured the border and has actually made good on mass deportations. We've also had sharp declines in fentanyl-related crossing seizures and key metrics. Major executive actors began on that in January of 2025. Right? This is a win. Can we not celebrate it as a win? Can we not shout it from the rooftops that, hey, we got fewer Americans that are dying as a result of fentanyl crossing our border? Energy production and deregulation. So energy dominance and reduced regulatory burden have been things that Trump promised and delivered on. So U.S. crude oil production hit records at 13.6 million barrels per day in 2025. That's up 350,000 barrels per day from prior levels. Federal Register pages, so that's the proxy for regulation burden, fell sharply, minus 43%. Federal Register pages, again, the proxy for regulatory burden, fell by 43%. That is a significant reduction in overall federal regulatory burden. Drill, baby, drill policies aligned with increased domestic outports and exports. So this is not just a question of what we've done domestically, but when you also look at what Donald Trump, for those people that are frustrated about the foreign stuff, if you look what Donald Trump did in Venezuela, right, with one special ops mission, and this is something I was initially skeptical of. I did whole episodes on why I was cautiously optimistic, but also skeptical that this was going to be pulled off without massive troop deployments. And yet, if you look at what happened in Venezuela, we had one of the textbook special operations mission that will go down in history as one of the best. It will be studied for generations. And now we turned the country with the largest known oil reserves in the Western Hemisphere, which had been teaming up with terrorist organizations, Russia and China. We have now made them a U.S. political ally which has put a stranglehold or has helped put a stranglehold on Cuba. It's also put a stranglehold on other communist countries and threats to the United States by denying them a huge source of oil. Not to mention the fact that having an ally that is the largest, with the largest oil reserves in the world, is of strategic import to the United States, not just because of who we deny oil to through that relationship, but who gets access to it. So the tax relief and economic measures, again, the one big beautiful bill, I get it. It's a mixed bag, but it did deliver large scale tax cuts to the tune of about $4.5 trillion based off of TCJA provisions, eliminated tax on tips, overtime for many, and expanded the child tax credits. Again, some of this is a mixed bag, and I acknowledge that it's a mixed bag, but anytime we're taking money away from the government and giving it back to people who have earned it, that is generally a positive development. All right, there's been strong GDP growth in later quarters with annualized peaks in quarter 3 and quarter 4 of 2025. Unemployment has remained low, despite the fact that when the tariffs went into place in order to renegotiate a lot of our trade deals with the world, people were anticipating that it was going to lead to massive employments. There's also been hundreds of billions of dollars announced in reshored investments within the United States, which is to say, part of the tariff strategy was to once again make it easier and incentivize to do business within the United States. So at the same time that Trump was doing these tariffs abroad, he wasn't just doing the tariffs as an end-all be-all. He was saying that, look, we have countries that have put the United States at a trade disadvantage. So we're going to match that trade disadvantage until they lower their barriers. That's a positive development because a lot of those countries did lower their barriers to U.S. products and services. By the same token, what he did is by reducing taxes and reducing the regulatory burden, he made it easier for people to do business in the United States. Well, there's going to be a delayed reaction to that. You're going to have people that are rebuilding plants, rebuilding factories, bringing back job opportunities to the United States, and that is a positive development. And when you're talking about hundreds of billions, even maybe trillions in announced reshored investments, that is significant. And yet, do you see any of the doomers on the right in the social media talking about any of it? No, they're too busy with what they haven't gotten so far. How about the idea of judicial bureaucracy and government efficiency reforms? So there's been dozens of judicial confirmations advanced. There's been implementation of accountability measures for federal workforce. This is the whole Schedule F thing, because so much of the federal workforce Trump couldn't even fire them. Even though they're federal employees, even though they work for the executive branch of the government, even if they were doing a horrible job, it didn't matter. Trump couldn't fire them. Well, he expanded Schedule F to give greater authority for the president to be able to fire people that didn't need to be there. And guess what? We have a record pace of federal employees actually being let go. In fact, Trump's even used some of the government shutdowns as an excuse. So the Democrats thought they would shut down the government to put Republicans at a disadvantage. And by the way, they did that intentionally before the elections in Virginia, because there's so many federal workers in Virginia that they wanted to try to create a narrative where federal workers would show up and vote Democrat. And they did. The Democrats were successful in that. But then Trump also used it in order to remove a bunch of federal employees. There's been something like over 200,000 federal employees that have been removed. And the bottom line is we don't need a massive federal bureaucracy. And while that is nowhere near as much as we would like to see happen, it's not a bad stat for the first year and a half he's been back in office. But again, do you see any emphasis among the black pill so-called conservatives that are now encouraging everyone to vote Democrat in the midterms to teach Donald Trump a lesson? Do you see Dave Smith or Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson talking about any of this? No, they just want to talk about Iran. They just want to talk about Israel. They don't want to mention any of the victories that we've actually had. Why is that? Why is it that there is such motivation to constantly demoralize the right, even when we have victories that we can point to? Again, it's one thing to say, hey, that's a victory and I acknowledge it, but here's something over here we need to do better. It's a big difference to say, nope, I'm going to make my entire narrative demoralization. Who does that advantage? Well, we're going to get to that here in a minute. What about Supreme Court victories? Now, keep in mind that we have a number of justices serving on the Supreme Court because of Donald Trump's first term. But here's some things that we actually need to look at. Overwhelming support on the emergency docket. So the Trump administration prevailed in 20 of 24 plus emergency rulings in 2025, plus strong merit wins. That's Trump versus Casa in June of 2025 with a 6-3 decision limiting nationwide universal injunctions against executive actions. Think about this for a second. We were all mad. So Trump is doing these things. Then we have all these lower federal judges doing nationwide injunctions, stopping Trump from doing the things that we elected him to do. So did he just say, oh, well, I guess there's nothing I can do? No, they challenged it in court. They got a 6-3 ruling, which put significant limitations on those universal injunctions. That doesn't just help Trump right now. That helps in the future. This was a win. This was a win that had to be realized by doing something that the left would oppose, experience limited success in that opposition so we could take it to the Supreme Court and get a bigger victory. But is it talked about as a victory? No. We just move on to the next expectation. We move on to the next thing that we're demanding. Key policy green lights: allowed implementation of birthright citizenship restrictions. That's steps toward a ban, right? Transgender military ban, mass deportations to third world country or to third countries, ending protected status for hundreds of thousands of migrants, firing of certain independent agency officials and withholding foreign aid payments. These are the sort of things that Trump was able to get done within the federal bureaucracy that we also got wins on the court at the same time. Broader conservative rulings, upheld state bans on gender-affirming care for minors. That's huge. That's huge. We had states that were pushing this idea that they should be able to take your kids, like in places like California, and medically transition them. And the Supreme Court ruled against it. Parental opt-outs for school curricula and LGBTQ plus topics. Again, school is in Maryland. We're trying to force your kids to go through LGBTQ education, and parents were not allowed to opt out. The Supreme Court came down and said, nope, you can't do that. That's a huge win. State and age verification laws for pornography sites. Again, another win. So now all these Pornhub and things like this have to actually verify age. And a lot of them just leave the state when they have to do that because they know they not only have a lot of crap, but that they can't actually do the age verification. They don't want to dedicate the time and resources to do it. And they know that a lot of their content is already illegal for other reasons. So there was dozens of favorable emergency and merits outcomes expanding the ability for the Trump administration to do the things that we elected him to do. But again, a lot of these decisions couldn't be made until Trump did something. It got challenged in court. It got challenged in court. There was a nationwide injunction. Take it to court and win. I realize that for a lot of people, they're like, well, that's too long a process. Well, that's our constitutional process. Foreign policy. Okay, he brokered elements of the ceasefire, which got Americans back from Gaza. He increased U.S. energy exports. He designated cartels as terrorist organizations and was able to take decisive action against them and continues to take decisive action against them. We have major declines in homicide rates and other crime metrics going on across the country, to include in major cities. We saw drastic reductions in crime in D.C. when he actually federalized the police force in D.C. and started to crack down and clean it up. We see DOJ under the Trump DOJ prioritized immigration enforcement, leading to thousands of deportations tied to criminal charges and sharp refocus of resources. We dropped 23,000 criminal investigations in early 2025, including many on non-immigration matters like fraud, drugs, and corruption. Advanced cases against perceived political opponents or aligned targets. See, this is the part where it's crazy. Even Grok, you see how they word some of this stuff, perceived political opponents. No, what happened is that Trump had a lot of people that abused government power during his first term to try to get him impeached, to try to obstruct what he was trying to do. And guess what? Now those people are starting to pay for it. So we're starting to see judgments against the Southern Poverty Law Center, which we all know has been operating as a way to completely try to rob conservatives of moral legitimacy. They've made him a target, both for the corporate world, but also for their psychos out there that like Antifa that go out there and try to hurt people. They're going after James Comey. Do I want him to go after Anthony Fauci? Yes. Yes, I was out there yesterday talking about this and pushing out Rand Paul stuff because I want them to go after Anthony Fauci and the people that got us under the COVID restrictions. But the bottom line is that there are wins taking place. There are people being held accountable, maybe not to the degree that you would like, but can we also keep something in mind? When Trump took over the DOJ, it's not like they had a bunch of dossiers ready to go in order to take all of the people in the Biden administration who had abused government power to court. No, instead what they had was a lot of people, mid-level management within federal departments that were actually hiding and obstructing any sort of investigations. They had to identify who these people were, get rid of them, replace them, and then actually build a case that would actually stick in court. That's not something you can do overnight. You can say all day long from the safety of your basement or your couch or wherever you're at, why aren't they prosecuting more people? Do you want the prosecutions to stick? Well, if you want them to stick, that actually takes time to build a case. That takes time to build a case.